The hardware store's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Cole reached for a box of screws, his daughter Harper tugging at his sleeve, when a small voice cut through the aisle chatter. Clear, curious, impossible. "Hello, sir. My mother has a tattoo just like yours." Cole froze, the box slipping from his fingers. The phoenix design on his wrist wasn't from any shop. He and one person had sketched it together 10 years ago. The night before, she vanished without explanation. The little girl stood there, maybe 9 years old, pointing at his exposed wrist with the kind of certainty that makes grown men's hearts stop, and her eyes were Harper's exact shade of green. Behind her, footsteps approached, expensive heels clicking against linoleum with the rhythm of everything Cole had buried, rising back to the surface. And he knew before he turned around that his carefully rebuilt life was about to crack wide open. Because some tattoos don't just mark skin, they mark the moment everything you thought you knew becomes a lie. And this child with his dead wife's eyes and a stranger's face was pointing at proof that the past never stays buried. What happens when the truth you've been running from walks up to you in a hardware store and calls you sir? The sawdust clung to Cole's jeans as he knelt beside Harper in the lumber section, measuring a 2x4 for the treehouse they'd been planning since spring. The afternoon sunlight cut through the high windows of Patterson Hardware, illuminating dust motes that danced like memories he'd learned to keep at bay. Harper hummed tunelessly, the way her mother used to when concentrating. And Cole felt the familiar ache settle behind his ribs. 2 years since cancer had taken Rachel. 2 years of learning to be both parents at once. The phoenix tattoo on his wrist caught the light as he marked the wood, its wings spread in eternal flight, and he pulled his sleeve down out of habit. Some things weren't meant for explaining to 8-year-olds, not yet. The design had been his and someone else's secret once, sketched on a napkin in a coffee shop when he was 26, and stupid enough to believe love conquered geography and ambition. Then she'd left for New York, with promises that dissolved like sugar in rain, and he'd met Rachel, built a life, learned what real love actually meant. Steady hands and hospital vigils, and the sound of a child's laughter filling rooms that used to echo. Harper tugged his sleeve. "Dad, that girl's staring at us." Cole glanced up to see a child near the paint samples, maybe a year older than Harper, with dark curls escaping a velvet headband that probably cost more than his grocery bill. She wore a navy dress with white collar, the kind of outfit that screamed private school and trust funds. And she was indeed staring at them with an intensity that made Cole uncomfortable. He offered a polite smile and turned back to his measurements, but Harper was already waving. "Hi, I'm Harper. Do you need help finding something?" The girl took 3 careful steps forward, her patent leather shoes silent on the concrete floor, and Cole noticed the way she held herself. Shoulders back, chin up, like someone had taught her. Posture mattered. "Hello," she said, her voice carrying the careful enunciation of expensive education. "My name is—" She paused, glanced toward the front of the store, then continued. "My name is Iris." There was something rehearsed about it, as if she'd practiced introductions in a mirror. Harper, never one for formality, grabbed Cole's arm and pulled him to standing. "This is my dad. He's building me a treehouse." "Do you have a treehouse?" Iris shook her head slowly, and for a moment, something vulnerable crossed her features. The universal look of childhood loneliness that transcended tax brackets. "We have a garden, but no trees strong enough. Mother says they're still too young." Her eyes drifted to Cole's wrist, where his sleeve had ridden up again during the motion of standing, and she went very still. The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song. Someone dropped a can of paint 3 aisles over. The clatter sharp in the hardware cathedral. Iris took another step closer, her gaze fixed on the phoenix, and Cole felt time slow down in that peculiar way it does before everything changes. "Hello, sir," she said, her voice smaller now, uncertain. "My mother has a tattoo just like yours." The box of screws hit the floor, ball bearings scattering across concrete like his thoughts. Cole heard Harper's surprised gasp, felt his daughter's hand on his elbow. But his entire focus had narrowed to this child, and the impossible words hanging in the air between them. "What did you say?" His voice came out rougher than intended. Iris pointed at his wrist with one delicate finger. "The bird. The phoenix with the broken wing that learned to fly. Mother has the same one on her shoulder. She never shows anyone, but I saw it once when she was changing. She told me it was from a long time ago, from someone she—" Footsteps, rapid now, expensive heels clicking an urgent rhythm. "Iris! Iris! Where did you—" The voice cut off mid-sentence, and Cole knew it before he turned. Some sounds burrow into your bones and wait there, dormant, until circumstance resurrects them. He turned slowly, the world narrowing to a pinpoint, and there she was. 10 years had refined her sharp edges into something almost dangerous. The ratty art student with paint-stained fingers had become a woman in a charcoal suit that probably cost what he made in a month. Her dark hair was shorter now, cut in a severe bob that framed cheekbones he'd once traced with reverent fingers. But her eyes, those hadn't changed. Still that particular shade of gray that reminded him of October, skies before rain. They were wide now, trapped between recognition and terror. Cole. His name left her lips like a confession, like a curse, like the final word of a prayer she'd been reciting for a decade. Genevieve. He tasted her name after 10 years of not speaking it, and it felt like touching a scar that had never properly healed. Harper pressed closer to his side, confused by the tension that had turned the air thick and hard to breathe. Iris looked between them, her small face creased with the kind of worry children get when they sense adult complications beyond their comprehension. Genevieve recovered first, her features smoothing into a mask of polite distance. "I apologize. Iris, we need to leave. Now." But Iris was looking at the tattoo again, then at her mother. Then back to Cole with the dawning wonder of a child, piecing together a puzzle adults thought they'd hidden. "Is he the one from your story? The one about the phoenix who found another phoenix and they learned to fly together before the storm came?" Genevieve's face went pale, and Cole felt something crack inside his chest. "What story?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But Genevieve was already taking Iris's hand, already turning away. "I'm sorry. We have to go. I'm sorry." She moved toward the exit with the desperate grace of someone fleeing a crime scene, pulling Iris along. But the girl looked back over her shoulder, and Cole saw it clearly now. The shape of her nose, the way her eyebrows arched, the stubborn set of her jaw that he recognized from every morning he looked in the mirror to shave. Harper's voice was small beside him. "Dad? Who was that lady? Why did she run away?" Cole couldn't answer. He was too busy calculating months, counting backwards, remembering the last night he'd spent with Genevieve before she disappeared. The hotel room, the rain against windows, the promises they'd made about calling, about making it work despite the distance. 9 months. Iris was 9 years old. The math was simple. The implications were apocalyptic. Cole moved through the next 3 days in a fog, his hands performing familiar tasks while his mind spun in useless circles. He finished the treehouse measurements, guided Harper through her homework, prepared meals he barely tasted, all while that moment in the hardware store played on repeat behind his eyes. The way Genevieve had looked at him, not with the hatred of an ex-lover or the indifference of true distance, but with something that looked remarkably like grief, mixed with fear. And Iris, sweet Iris, with her careful posture and her mother's eyes and his jawline, asking about phoenixes learning to fly. He tried to work, taking on a custom cabinet project that required his full concentration, but his hands kept fumbling measurements he could normally make in his sleep. The problem was the not knowing. If Iris was his daughter, and every cell in his body screamed that she was, why had Genevieve kept it secret? Why disappear completely instead of telling him? He'd loved her once, loved her with the kind of intensity that feels like drowning and flying simultaneously. When she left for that prestigious art gallery position in New York, he'd offered to follow. She'd said no, said his life was here, his family business was here. She couldn't ask him to abandon it. 3 weeks later, she'd stopped answering his calls, blocked his number, vanished so completely, it was like she'd never existed at all. So he'd done what people do. He'd grieved. He'd moved on. He'd met Rachel at a woodworking exhibition where she'd admired a rocking chair he'd made, and they'd talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing. Rachel had been steady where Genevieve was storm, present where Genevieve was always half gone, and Cole had built a good life with her, a real life. Harper had arrived 2 years into their marriage, all red-faced determination and perfect fingers, and Cole had understood for the first time what his father meant about love, that grounds you instead of unmooring you. Rachel's cancer diagnosis came when Harper was 4. The doctors gave her 5 years, and she fought for 6, refused to waste a single day on bitterness or why me questions. She'd made him promise to live after she was gone, to not let grief turn him into a ghost in his own house. He'd kept that promise, mostly. But now this. Now Genevieve, and a 9-year-old girl with his face, and a story about phoenixes. Harper found him in his workshop on the 3rd night, sitting on the floor with an unfinished drawer in his lap, and tears he hadn't realized he was crying, sliding down his face. She climbed into his lap without asking, 8 years old, and already wise enough to know when silence was the only gift that mattered. They sat like that for a long time, the smell of cedar and old varnish surrounding them, until Harper finally spoke. I liked that girl, Iris. She seemed lonely. Cole's throat was too tight for words, so he just nodded. Do you think we'll see her again? Harper continued, her voice thoughtful. I hope so. I've always wanted a sister. The words hit him like a physical blow, and he had to close his eyes against the surge of emotion. Harper couldn't know. Nobody knew. But children had a way of seeing truths adults tried to hide, and Harper had always been particularly perceptive. Baby, he managed finally, his voice rough. Life doesn't always give us what we want. Harper leaned back to look at him, her green eyes, Rachel's eyes, serious. Mommy used to say that sometimes life gives us what we need instead, but we have to be brave enough to see it. The discovery came accidentally on Saturday morning. Cole was at the farmer's market with Harper, buying tomatoes for the sauce Rachel had taught him to make when he saw her. Genevieve, in jeans and a simple white shirt that probably still cost more than his entire outfit, examining heirloom vegetables with the same intense focus she used to apply to her paintings. No Iris in sight. Cole's feet were moving before his brain caught up, Harper's hand in his, as they navigated between stalls selling honey and handmade soap. Harper, go look at those pastries for a second, okay? Pick one out for later. He pressed a 10 into her hand and watched her bounce toward the bakery stall, before turning back to where Genevieve stood, frozen by the tomatoes, her eyes closed like she was praying for a different outcome. We need to talk, Cole said quietly. Genevieve's eyes opened, and he was struck again by the grief in them. Old grief that had calcified into something permanent. There's nothing to talk about. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she placed a tomato back in its basket. Cole, please, just let this go. Let it go? The words came out sharper than intended, and an elderly woman at the next stall glanced over with interest. Cole lowered his voice. Genevieve, she looks exactly like me. Exactly. And you run away the second we meet? You don't think I deserve an explanation?" Genevieve's face was a mask, but he saw the muscles in her jaw working. "What do you want me to say?" Cole wanted to grab her shoulders, shake her, make her look at him properly. Instead, he kept his hands at his sides, fisted so tight his nails bit into palms. "I want you to tell me the truth. Is Iris mine?" The question hung between them like smoke, and for a moment, Cole thought she might actually answer. Then her expression shuddered completely, and when she spoke, her voice carried the flat effect of someone reciting lines. "No, she's not. And even if she were, what difference would it make? You have your life, Cole. I have mine. We're strangers who happen to shop at the same hardware store. That's all." She moved to walk past him, but Cole stepped into her path, desperate now. "The tattoo, Genevieve. She knows about the tattoo. She told me you told her a story about phoenixes learning to fly together." Something cracked in Genevieve's facade, just for a second, a flash of such raw pain that Cole physically felt it. "I need you to leave us alone," she whispered, and her voice was breaking now, the careful control dissolving. "Please, Cole, I'm begging you." "You don't understand what's at stake here." Before he could respond, Harper's voice rang out, bright and clear. "Dad, Dad, look who I found." Cole's heart stopped. Harper was walking toward them, hand in hand with Iris, both girls carrying paper bags of pastries and wearing matching grins. "Iris, I can't believe you're here. Her nanny brought her to get bread. Can she come play at our house? Please." Iris was looking up at Genevieve with such hopeful eyes that Cole felt his chest constrict. "Mother, can I? Harper says they're building a treehouse and I could help." Genevieve looked between the two girls, and Cole watched 10 years of carefully constructed walls crumble in real time. Her shoulders sagged. Her breath came shorter. When she met his eyes, he saw surrender there, mixed with terror and something that might have been relief. "1 hour," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "You can visit for 1 hour, and then Catherine comes to get you." Iris let out a whoop of delight that sounded so much like Harper, it was almost painful. As the girls ran ahead toward Cole's truck, chattering about tree houses and whether pink or purple paint was better, Genevieve grabbed his arm. Her fingers were cold, even in the warm morning. "Cole, She stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. "There are things you don't know, things I can't explain. But please, please be careful with her. She's fragile, more than she seems." Cole studied her face, seeing the shadows under her eyes, the fine lines that hadn't been there a decade ago, the weight of secrets that had carved themselves into her features. "I need to know the truth, Genevieve. Whatever it is, whatever happened. I need to know." She held his gaze for a long moment, and he saw her warring with herself, saw the moment she made a decision. "Come to my house tonight, after the girls are asleep. I'll tell you everything." She pulled out a business card, thick, expensive cardstock that read, "Genevieve Hartley, Curator, Hartley Foundation," and wrote an address on the back. 8 o'clock, come alone. The hour with the girls was simultaneously wonderful and agonizing. Harper and Iris clicked immediately, their laughter filling the backyard as they helped Cole measure lumber for the treehouse platform. Iris had clearly never used a hammer before, but she approached each nail with the serious concentration of someone used to mastering difficult things through sheer determination. She asked careful questions about measurements and weight distribution. Her vocabulary far more advanced than Harper's, but when Harper showed her how to draw plans in the dirt with a stick, Iris's face lit up with unguarded joy. Cole watched them together and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. They could have been sisters, moved the same way, tilted their heads at the same angle when thinking. Harper's coloring came from Rachel. that auburn hair and fair skin, while Iris was darker like Genevieve, but underneath the surface differences, the architecture was identical. The shape of their hands, the way they both bit their lower lip when concentrating, the stubborn set of their shoulders. When Catherine arrived, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, who introduced herself as Iris's nanny and shot Cole a look that said she'd memorized his face for a future police lineup, Iris hugged Harper goodbye with the fierce desperation of someone who'd found water in a desert and was being forced to leave it behind. "Can we do this again?" she asked, looking between Harper and Cole with such hope it hurt. Harper answered before Cole could. "Yes, tomorrow! We can work on the treehouse every day until it's done." Iris's smile could have lit cities. The address Genevieve had given him led to a neighborhood Cole had only ever driven through on his way to somewhere else. The kind of place where houses hid behind stone walls and ancient trees, where money wasn't flaunted because it didn't need to be. The gate opened at his approach, clearly expecting him, and Cole followed a winding drive to a modern masterpiece of glass and steel that probably graced architecture magazines. This wasn't art gallery curator money. This was something else entirely. Genevieve answered the door herself, barefoot in jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that made Cole's chest ache with sense memory. She looked younger like this, closer to the girl he'd known. "Come in," she said quietly, stepping aside to let him enter a foyer that was more art gallery than home. Soaring ceilings, carefully curated paintings, sculpture that probably cost more than his house. "Iris is asleep?" Cole asked, and Genevieve nodded. "Her room's on the 3rd floor. She won't hear us." She led him through the house to a study lined with books, poured them both whiskey from a crystal decanter without asking if he wanted it, and handed him a glass with shaking hands. They stood like that for a moment, not quite facing each other, while the weight of 10 years pressed down on the space between them. "Her name is Iris Hartley," Genevieve began, her voice flat with the careful control of someone who'd rehearsed this. "She's 9 years old. She was born on March 14th at Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. She likes art and mathematics, plays violin at a pre-conservatory level, speaks 3 languages, and has never had a birthday party with more than 2 other children present." Cole waited, knowing there was more. Genevieve took a long drink of her whiskey and continued. "She's also never met her father, has no idea who he is. And I've spent 9 years making sure it stays that way." The words were meant to hurt, and they did, but Cole pushed past the pain. Why? It was the only question that mattered. Genevieve finally turned to face him, and the raw anguish in her expression made him take an involuntary step forward. "Because telling you would have destroyed everything you had. Because I left to give you a chance at a real life, not the half-existence I could offer you." She set down her glass and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small in the oversized sweater. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after I left. I was in New York, starting the gallery job, and I took a test in a convenience store bathroom at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep and kept throwing up and couldn't keep pretending it was stress." Her voice cracked, and she paused to collect herself. "I sat on that dirty floor with the plastic stick in my hand, and I thought about calling you. God, Cole, I thought about it for days. I had my phone out 100 times. But then I did what I always do. I researched. I looked you up online, checked your social media, and that's when I saw it." She met his eyes, and hers were swimming now. "You were engaged. To Rachel. You'd posted photos from a dinner where you proposed. You looked so happy, Cole. So fundamentally at peace in a way you never looked with me." Cole felt like the floor had dropped away. "You were pregnant with my child, and you didn't tell me because I'd moved on?" The anger in his voice was sharp, but underneath it was something much more complicated. Genevieve laughed, but it was bitter. "Not just moved on. You'd found what you needed. Rachel was, God, even in those photos I could see she was steady, present, everything I wasn't. I was chaos, Cole. I was ambition and restlessness, and I would have pulled you away from your family, your business, everything that grounded you. And for what? A relationship that was already falling apart before I left? She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. I loved you enough to let you be happy, even if it meant raising our daughter alone. The silence that followed was heavy with all the different futures that had died that day in a New York bathroom. Cole's voice, when he finally found it, was rough. You didn't just decide for yourself, Genevieve. You decided for me. For Iris. You took away my choice. She nodded slowly. I know. And I've lived with that guilt every single day. But Cole, you need to understand. I didn't just disappear. I came from money. Old money that my family had been managing for generations. When my father died 6 months after Iris was born, I inherited the Hartley Foundation. Millions of dollars, property, investments, all of it tied up in trusts and legal structures that would have made co-parenting a nightmare. She turned to face him fully now, and he saw the exhaustion carved into her features. I wasn't just some art student who got lucky with a gallery job. I was a trust fund kid trying to build something on my own before the money swallowed me. And when it did, when I became Iris's only parent and sole heir to everything my family had built, I made a choice. I built walls. I kept her safe. I kept her private. And I told myself that giving you up was the price of that safety. Cole set down his untouched whiskey, his hands trembling too badly to hold the glass. Did Rachel know? It was a question he hadn't planned to ask, but suddenly needed answered. Genevieve shook her head. How would she? I made sure every trace of my pregnancy disappeared. Used my mother's maiden name at the hospital. Had the birth registered under a different last name initially. Changed it legally when Iris was 6 months old. I was thorough, Cole. Ruthlessly thorough. She paused, then added softly, I'm sorry about Rachel. I read about it online. I thought about reaching out then, but Cole cut her off. But what? You thought I'd had enough suffering. Didn't need to know I had another daughter. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. And he saw Genevieve flinch. I thought you deserved to grieve in peace. I thought adding this truth would only multiply the pain. That wasn't your call to make, Cole said, but his anger was fading now, replaced by something more complex. A grief for all the moments he'd missed, mixed with understanding he didn't want to feel. He thought about those years with Rachel, how complete they'd seemed, how Harper's arrival had felt like the perfect fulfillment of their family. If Genevieve had told him about Iris then, what would he have done? Left his pregnant wife? Split his time between two families? The scenarios played out in his head, and none of them ended well. Maybe Genevieve had been right. Maybe her silence had been a strange kind of gift, allowing him to love Rachel and Harper without the complication of divided loyalties. But now Rachel was gone, and the secret had found its way to light anyway, and Cole couldn't decide if this was fate or just terrible timing. Why didn't you tell me when Rachel died? He asked finally. You had 2 years. 2 years where telling me wouldn't have destroyed an existing family. Genevieve's face crumpled. Because by then I was terrified. Terrified you'd hate me. Terrified you'd take Iris away. Terrified she'd hate me for keeping you from her. I'd built this entire life around the story that her father was a brief relationship that didn't work out, that he didn't know about her and was happier that way. I told her he was a good man who loved building things, who had kind hands, and would have loved her if he'd known she existed, but that sometimes adults make choices they can't undo. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face unchecked. I told her about the tattoos, showed her mine, told her somewhere in the world was a person with the matching one who carried a piece of her in his heart, even though he didn't know it. It was the only truth I could give her. Cole moved without thinking, crossing the space between them and pulling her into his arms. She collapsed against him, 10 years of held tears finally breaking free, and Cole held her while she shook with the force of them. He was crying too, he realized, silent tears for everything they'd lost and everything they'd done to each other in the name of love. They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd tried to protect each other in the worst possible ways, while upstairs, a child slept who was proof that some secrets are too big to stay buried. When Genevieve finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, and she looked more real than she had in 10 years. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Cole wiped his own face with the back of his hand and took a shaky breath. "Now? Now you tell me everything. Every birthday I missed, every milestone, every word she said and step she took. You tell me about her. Really tell me. And then we figure out how to be honest with her. Together." Genevieve nodded slowly, and Cole saw relief war with terror on her face. "She asks about you, you know, about her father. She has this fantasy that you're out there somewhere, that someday you'll find each other and it'll be like a fairy tale. I've tried to prepare her for disappointment, but she's so hopeful, Cole. She's got your stubbornness and my dreaming, and it's this heartbreaking combination of wanting the impossible and believing she can make it happen through sheer force of will." Cole felt something fierce and protective surge through him. "Tell me," he said simply. So she did. They sat on the floor of that expensive study, backs against a leather couch that probably cost more than his truck, and Genevieve told him about the daughter he'd never known, about how Iris was born 3 weeks early during a thunderstorm, how she'd come out screaming with her fists raised like she was ready to fight the world, how she'd been a colicky baby who only calmed when Genevieve hummed, so Genevieve had hummed for months straight until her throat was raw, how Iris's first word had been more because she was always hungry for everything, more food, more books, more music, more life. She told him about Iris at 3, conducting an invisible orchestra with a wooden spoon, so serious about it that Genevieve had found her a real violin teacher who declared the child had perfect pitch. About Iris at 5, reading chapter books and asking questions about death and infinity that Genevieve had no idea how to answer. About Iris at 7, learning that some kids at her private school had dads who came to events, quietly asking why hers didn't, accepting Genevieve's careful answer with a thoughtfulness that had broken Genevieve's heart. She told him about the loneliness, how, despite the money for everything, despite the best schools and teachers and opportunities, Iris was isolated, how the other wealthy kids sensed she was different, how their parents whispered about the Hartley heiress being raised by a single mother, how Iris had learned early to build walls around herself and let very few people in. She told him about the nightmares Iris had sometimes, about abandonment and being forgotten, how she'd wake up crying for a father she'd never met, and how Genevieve would hold her and feel the weight of every lie she'd ever told crushing her chest. By the time Genevieve finished, it was past midnight, and Cole felt like he'd lived 9 years in a few hours. His daughter, and she was his daughter, he knew that now with every cell in his body, had grown up in a world of privilege and loneliness, wanting for nothing except the one thing money couldn't buy. "I want to tell her," Cole said finally. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. She deserves to know." Genevieve was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Harper deserves to know too. They already love each other. I could see it today in your backyard. Maybe they knew before we did." Cole thought about Harper's comment about always wanting a sister, about Iris's desperate hug goodbye, about how right they'd looked standing side by side. "They're sisters," he said, and the words felt both impossible and inevitable. However we got here, whatever we did wrong, they're sisters, and they should get to be sisters. Over the next 2 weeks, Cole and Genevieve navigated an impossible situation with the delicacy of people defusing a bomb made of their own mistakes. They met for coffee while the girls were at school. Awkward conversations about logistics and feelings that were easier to have in public, where neither could break down. They texted throughout the day, updating each other on small things. Iris had a violin recital coming up. Harper had lost a tooth. Both girls were asking when they could play together again. Slowly, carefully, they started to build something that wasn't quite friendship and wasn't quite co-parenting, but was honest in a way their relationship had never been. Cole learned that Genevieve had never remarried, never even dated seriously, too consumed with raising Iris and managing the foundation. Genevieve learned that Cole had built his small woodworking business into something sustainable after Rachel died, that he'd been surviving more than living until Harper pulled him back from the edge. They circled around each other like planets finding a new orbit, drawn together by the children they'd created, but separated by a decade of choices neither could undo. The girls, meanwhile, had decided on their own terms that they were best friends. Harper invited Iris to every activity. Treehouse building continued, but also trips to the library, the playground, the ice cream shop where Cole had been taking Harper since she was tiny. Catherine, the nanny, initially accompanied Iris to everything with the vigilance of a Secret Service agent, but even she couldn't resist the simple joy of watching Iris be a regular kid. Cole watched his daughters together. And God, it still felt strange to think it, daughters plural, and saw Iris gradually shed layers of the careful polish that had been trained into her. She got sawdust in her hair and dirt on her expensive clothes. She shrieked with laughter when Harper pushed her on the swing. She ate popsicles that dripped on her shoes and didn't immediately panic. She was learning to be a child instead of an heiress, and Cole fell in love with her a little more every day. Harper, for her part, appointed herself Iris's guide to normal kid life, with the seriousness of someone entrusted with a sacred duty. She taught Iris how to climb trees, how to make mud pies, how to draw with sidewalk chalk and not worry about getting it perfect. She shared her markers and her books and her hard-won wisdom about which teachers at school were nice and which gave too much homework. And when Iris had nightmares during a sleepover, because of course there were sleepovers now, Catherine's protests be damned, Harper climbed into bed beside her and held her hand until she fell back asleep, the same way Rachel used to do for Harper. Cole watched all of this with his heart in his throat, knowing they were running out of time before the truth had to be told. Secrets had a way of growing toxic, and he could see the question forming in Harper's eyes every time she looked at Iris, saw the similarities she couldn't quite name. Children weren't stupid. They'd figure it out eventually. Better to tell them the truth than let them stumble onto it. He broached the subject with Genevieve on a Thursday evening, after dropping both girls at Iris's house for another sleepover. They sat in her kitchen, less intimidating than the study, more human, drinking tea neither of them wanted. "This weekend," Cole said. "We tell them this weekend." Genevieve's hand trembled around her mug. "Are you sure they're ready?" Cole met her eyes. "Are we ready? Because that's the real question. The girls will handle this better than we will. Kids are resilient. It's us who are terrified." She was quiet for a moment, then gave a short laugh. "You're right. I've been a coward about this for 9 years. Another day won't make me braver." They planned it carefully. Saturday afternoon at Cole's house, because it felt more neutral than Genevieve's mansion. Just the 4 of them, so the girls wouldn't feel like they were facing an inquisition. Cole would start, explaining to Harper first that he'd just learned something important about Iris. Genevieve would help fill in details. They'd keep it simple, age-appropriate, honest, without being overwhelming. They'd answer questions. They'd reassure both girls that nothing bad was happening, that this was actually a good thing, even though it was complicated. They practiced the words until they sounded almost natural, knowing that the moment they actually said them, all rehearsal would go out the window. Saturday arrived with perfect weather that felt like mockery, bright sunshine and gentle breeze, while Cole's stomach churned with anxiety. Harper helped him make sandwiches for lunch, chattering about the fort she and Iris wanted to build in the treehouse now that the platform was finished. She was so happy, so uncomplicated in her joy about having a friend, and Cole felt the weight of what he was about to tell her pressing down on his shoulders. When Genevieve arrived with Iris, both girls ran immediately to the backyard to inspect the treehouse progress, giving the adults a few minutes alone. "I'm terrified," Genevieve admitted, and Cole took her hand without thinking. "Me too," he said. "But we're doing this together. Whatever happens, we face it together." She squeezed his fingers gratefully, and Cole felt the strange intimacy of shared fear binding them in a way their old love never had. They called the girls inside after lunch, and the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Harper and Iris exchanged glances, their kid radar picking up on adult tension. They sat on the couch side by side, united front against whatever serious thing was about to happen, and Cole felt his heart crack at their unconscious solidarity. "Girls," he started, then had to stop and clear his throat. "Harper, Iris, we need to talk to you about something important, something we should have told you before, but we—" He looked at Genevieve, saw her nod encouragingly, continued. "We made some mistakes a long time ago and we're trying to fix them now." Harper's eyes were wide. "What kind of mistakes?" Cole took a breath. There was no easy way to say this. "Harper, you know how you've always said you wished you had a sister?" His daughter nodded slowly. "Well, the thing is, you do. You have a sister. Iris is your sister." The silence that followed was absolute. Harper looked at Iris, then at Cole, then at Genevieve, her 8-year-old mind working through the implications. Iris had gone very still, her expression unreadable in a way that reminded Cole painfully of Genevieve. "I don't understand," Harper said finally. "How can Iris be my sister?" "She has a different mom." This was the hard part. Cole glanced at Genevieve, who nodded and took over. "Iris, honey, do you remember the stories I told you about your father? About the kind man who liked building things?" Iris nodded slowly, and Cole saw hope kindling in her eyes, dangerous and bright. "The man I told you about, he's Cole. Harper's dad. He's your father, too." The words hung in the air like smoke. Iris's face went through a series of rapid changes: confusion, hope, disbelief, and finally, a desperate kind of joy that made Cole's chest constrict. "You're my dad?" she whispered, looking at him with such naked longing it hurt. "You're the one from the stories?" Cole nodded, not trusting his voice. Iris launched herself off the couch and into his arms with the force of 9 years of wanting, and Cole caught her, held her, felt her small body shaking with sobs against his chest. "I knew it," she gasped between tears. "I knew when I saw the tattoo. I knew you were him. Mother. I knew." Harper was crying too, and Genevieve pulled her into a hug while Harper's mind caught up to the revelation. "So Iris is my sister?" she asked through tears. "My real sister?" Genevieve smiled despite her own tears. "Yes, sweetheart. Your real sister." Harper looked at Iris, still clinging to Cole, and a grin broke across her face. "I have a sister. I told you I always wanted a sister." The joy in her voice was so pure, so uncomplicated by adult concerns about timing and past mistakes, that Cole felt something tight in his chest finally loosen. Iris pulled back from Cole's chest enough to look at Harper, her face blotchy and tear-stained, but radiant. "I have a sister, too. And a dad. I have a family. The way she said it, with wonder and disbelief and fierce determination, like she was claiming something she'd fight to keep, broke something in Cole. He reached out and pulled Harper into the embrace too, both his daughters in his arms, and looked up to find Genevieve watching them with an expression that was equal parts grief and relief. "Come here," he said softly, and after a moment's hesitation she joined them, completing the circle. They sat like that on the floor of Cole's living room, 4 people learning how to be a family, in the wreckage of old mistakes and found truths, while outside the treehouse waited to be finished, and summer stretched endlessly ahead, and everything impossible suddenly felt within reach. The questions came later, of course. Harper wanted to know why she hadn't known about Iris before, why Genevieve had kept it secret, why grown-ups were so complicated. Iris wanted to know everything about Cole, his favorite color, his favorite food, what he was like as a kid. Could she call him Dad? Or was that too soon? Could she really stay here whenever she wanted now? They answered as honestly as they could, stumbling over explanations about adult choices and difficult situations, and the girls listened with the gravity of children who understand more than they should. In the end, Harper summed it up with the kind of clarity only an 8-year-old could muster. "So you guys messed up, but now you're fixing it. And the important thing is, we're all together now. Right?" Cole had to laugh despite the tears on his face. "Yeah, baby." That's exactly right. The months that followed were a complicated dance of building something new from broken pieces. Genevieve hired lawyers to establish formal custody arrangements, insisting Cole have full legal recognition as Iris's father. Cole sold a major piece, a custom dining set that got featured in a home magazine, and put the money toward a college fund for Iris, matching the one he'd started for Harper years ago. They had family dinners twice a week, awkward at first, but growing easier as they learned each other's rhythms. Iris started calling Cole Dad, with only slight hesitation, and the first time she said it naturally, asking him to pass the potatoes at dinner. He had to excuse himself to cry in the bathroom. Harper and Iris became inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and developing the kind of twin language that siblings create. They fought sometimes, petty arguments about whose turn it was to pick the movie or who got the window seat in Cole's truck, and Cole treasured those fights because they were so beautifully normal. Genevieve surprised everyone by announcing she was opening a second gallery location in town, something small and personal that she could manage herself instead of through the foundation. "I've spent 9 years in New York building walls," she told Cole over coffee one morning. "Maybe it's time to try building something else." She bought a renovated warehouse near Cole's workshop, close enough that Iris could walk to his studio after school if she wanted. The proximity felt intentional. Like Genevieve was trying to make up for years of distance by eliminating geography from the equation. Cole appreciated it, even if having his ex-girlfriend, now co-parent, nearby sometimes felt surreal. They were finding their way to friendship, or something like it. The kind of relationship built on shared responsibility and hard-won honesty rather than romance. It wasn't what they'd been, but it was real in a way their old relationship had never quite managed. On the first anniversary of the hardware store meeting, Cole finished the treehouse. It had taken longer than planned, but he'd added features as he went. A rope ladder Iris could climb, a pulley system for lifting supplies, carved initials for both girls in the support beams, a weatherproof box for their treasures. The girls declared it perfect and immediately claimed it as their fortress, hanging a sign that read, "Harper and Iris's Castle. No adults except Dad," that made Cole laugh and ache simultaneously. That evening, after the girls had fallen asleep in the treehouse despite Catherine's protests about proper beds, Cole and Genevieve sat on his back porch with beers and comfortable silence. "Thank you," she said finally, "for not hating me, for giving Iris what I couldn't." Cole considered that. "You gave her everything that mattered. You kept her safe. You raised an incredible kid." "Yeah, I wish you'd told me sooner. But I also know why you didn't. We were both protecting the people we loved the best way we knew how." Genevieve was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been hanging between them since that first conversation in her study. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd told you? Back then, when I first found out?" Cole did wonder, sometimes. Late at night when he couldn't sleep, he'd play out those alternate timelines, leaving Rachel, trying to make it work with Genevieve, splitting his life between two families. None of those scenarios felt right. "I think," he said slowly, "that we got here the long way around, made a mess of things, hurt each other and ourselves, and probably traumatized our kids in ways we won't know about until they're in therapy in their 20s. Genevieve laughed despite herself. "But," Cole continued, "we're here now. Both girls are happy. They have each other. We're figuring it out. Maybe that's enough." Genevieve smiled, and it was the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her since she'd walked back into his life. "Maybe it is," she agreed. In the treehouse above them, Harper and Iris slept tangled together in sleeping bags, their breathing synchronized, their hands loosely clasped, even in sleep. Two girls who'd found each other despite every obstacle their parents had placed in the way, who'd known before anyone told them that they were meant to be sisters, who'd taken the complicated mess of adult mistakes and transformed it into something simple and true. They'd wake up at dawn, climb down for pancakes, and spend the day doing exactly what children should, building forts and telling stories and believing in the impossible. And their parents, flawed and trying and finally honest, would watch over them and be grateful for hardware stores and phoenix tattoos and little girls brave enough to point at truth when they saw it. Some families are born, some are made, and some are torn apart and reassembled by the sheer force of love refusing to stay buried, by children who see past the walls adults build, by the stubborn insistence that it's never too late to tell the truth and begin again. The phoenix on Cole's wrist caught the last rays of sunset, its wings spread in flight, and he thought about the matching one on Genevieve's shoulder, how they'd designed them together when they were young and stupid, and thought matching tattoos meant forever. They'd been wrong about forever. But maybe they'd been right about phoenixes, about burning down and rising again, about learning to fly even with broken wings, about finding your way back to where you belonged, even if the path was longer and harder than it should have been. In the treehouse, Iris stirred in her sleep and murmured something that sounded like Dad, and Cole felt his heart expand with the kind of love that hurts because it's too big for one person's chest to contain. This was his family now, messy and complicated, and not at all what he'd planned, but real. So beautifully, impossibly real, and that was more than enough.